Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Chasing Dreams podcast with Charlie and Justin. We are on episode 113. And Justin, we're doing back-to-back episodes for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, for a long time.
So you and I actually had an interview earlier today for an episode, and we recorded. And we used to, back in the day, create like a little bit of a almost like a savings account. Yeah, a bank of episodes in case there were some things that came up where we couldn't record. And unfortunately, what that kind of delegated itself to being is it was like almost just like we used them without actually making an effort to save them.
Yeah.
So if we had 5 episodes saved up, what we did was we just used one the first week, and then the second week we used another, and we just did that until they were empty. So it really didn't give us much of an emergency fund,
Right.
like we originally intended it to. And then since then, we did that early on in like the first year, and then since then we've just done once a week. So we've been pretty consistent with that. But we had the awesome opportunity to get a sweet guest on in our first episode. And likewise, we have another guest joining us for this episode. So we'd like to welcome Dr. Tyler Bordick to the show. So Dr. Tyler, how are you doing this freezing cold Saturday morning?
Freezing. Absolutely freezing.
It was horrible, dude. When Justin and I trained together this morning and we got to the gym, what time did we start? 5?
5,
which is a little bit later for us. But we got to the gym at 5, and on my way, my temperature gauge was like oscillating between 5 and 7 degrees pretty much the whole time. And it did not get any better.
Yeah.
And actually, truthfully, when I was done at the gym, I trained a couple, went home, prepared some food, trained a couple clients before coming here to record, and it was up to 32, and it felt like amazing. Like 32 felt, I don't want to say warm, but it certainly wasn't nearly as bad as it was.
Yeah, isn't that ironic how that works?
Yeah.
3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's like my check engine light's on in my truck, so my automatic start won't go on. Hashtag first world problems, right? But I basically cryo chambered myself in my commute this morning.
That's awesome. So, Dr. Tyler, can you give us a little bit of a rundown? Obviously, you and I have a lengthy history together, but can you give our audience a rundown of who you are, what you do, both business, professionally speaking, and then recreational as well? Just like a little bit of a background on who Dr. Tyler is.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Tyler. I love warm walks on the beach. I like cosmopolitans in the morning, right when I get out of bed. No, I'm just kidding. So Dr. Tyler Bordick, grew up in Katanning, Pennsylvania. It's a little small blue-collar town in western PA. From there, I went to Erie, PA for where I met Charlie, the best part of my life, if I must say, because my wife's not listening right now.
He's already my favorite guest. This is
awesome. Met Charlie at Gannett University, went there 4 years, and went to Slippery Rock University for my doctorate in physical therapy. And then from there, traveled around a bunch of different places. Now I've ended up in, I live in southern Pittsburgh, but I met my business partner right now, Ryan Wade, who owned a gym called Wade Train, but then transferred to Inner Strength to incorporate physio into it. Him and I met, and we have a location in what's called Coriopolis, which is, if you don't know Pittsburgh, it's right by the airport. That's where our one location is. And then we actually just opened up our second location in more southern Pittsburgh and getting that going. So the gym, what we really wanted to do, and this is kind of my niche, if you will, is I also have a strength conditioning background. And so I really wanted to blend the two, because I think it's idiotic that we have physical therapists and then we have strength conditioning coaches, and there's like no real mesh of the two. And God forbid, if you go to a physical therapy clinic, people are doing calf raises on slant boards to stretch their calves. And they're doing body weight squats whenever this is a professional athlete. So all things said, we just really wanted to blend the two, wanted to bring everything under one roof. And luckily, when I met Ryan, he had the same mindset, and we just brought that together. He has a strength conditioning background as well. And then boom, here we are.
Cool. Very cool. So as a PT, you obviously went to a lot of school, because that was, I think, somewhat recent, probably right before you and I entered college, that they changed it to a doctoral program. Because I know, like, licensure, wasn't it to get licensed as a PT? I think that, because my mom's a physical therapist, and I think that when she was in school, it was just a normal 4-year degree, maybe 1 year post-grad, I'm not sure. or a graduate, but I'm not sure. Regardless, it somewhat recently turned into a doctoral program, right?
Sure. So yeah, so for a long time, it was just a bachelor degree. And then about 20 years ago, I want to say is where, and please no one fact check me on me because I'm probably horribly wrong on this, but I'd say about like 20 years ago, it became like a master's program. And then, yeah, just probably within the last 10 years, they changed it to a doctorate degree for no reason, really, probably just because chiros are doctors and we want to have special names for ourselves. But yeah, in reality, it just recently became doctorate. So.
Gotcha. So what now, when you look at what you do now in terms of your education being so lengthy and so financially debilitating, I guess I'm sure.
Investment, Charlie, investment.
Yeah, there you go. Investment. It's value. How much of it would you look back at and say that if you could allocate a specific percentage to it? And I know that you're obviously going to have some like ambiguous number here, but
Sure.
if you could create a percentage of what you learned in school and how much of that is actually applicable today, what percentage would you say is academia? And then obviously I'm assuming the other percent is on the job thing that you've learned either by working at a specific clinic or being with your business partner or whatever. So what percent of it came from school and what percent of it was like learn on the fly as you go?
So do you want me to give you the short answer or the long answer?
Long answer. We got plenty of time.
Awesome. And there's a reason I say that, because as soon as you said that, the fireworks in my mind started going off, both emotionally and cognitively. So we'll see where this ends up. It might become a shit show. But anyhow, so honestly, I whenever I went to PT school, I said, if you would take a neuroscientist, you would take an orthopedic surgeon or an orthopedic doctor, so I don't offend anybody. And if you would take a strength conditioning coach, and then you would also take mildly like a nurse in like a primary care a hospital setting, and you throw them into a blender and you mix them all up, a physical therapy student would magically pop out. Because in school, it is crazy. Like they talk about, we don't actually know, like research shows that we don't actually know the potential of the brain and how much it holds. I think I reached that. I can only imagine what it's like to be a med student, because you get so much, there's so much information gets thrown at you and so much knowledge that you gain. And this is what pisses me off. Is it okay if I swear on this, by the way?
Yeah, you're fine. Try to keep it within relative check, but.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to use little tiny words here. So, and this is what used to piss me off, is the fact that I see physical therapists now who, like, you go to school and you get this extensive degree and you gain all this knowledge, and then you piss it away as soon as you get a career.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy. So to answer your question, I would say right now I probably use about 15% of what I learned. Which but at the same time, I mean, there's so much you learn that should be relevant. And unfortunately, in the health and wellness realm, there's so much that we learned in school that the barrier to entry is very small. And so a lot of what we learned in school, many people didn't experience, didn't learn, and they're out there just selling programs like hotcakes, just because who doesn't want a big butt?
Yeah.
Or a big chest,
Yeah, I think that it's interesting when you talk about that, because that's really like the buzz phrase right now with social media, is how everybody, whether qualified with credentials or not, has a pretty large voice. And realistically, the largest voices are just a manifestation of who has the largest following.
Yep.
So if my
Sure.
following is the biggest, my voice is ultimately going to be the loudest. And you have a lot of people that aren't qualified to do things. And I've never really been someone who's super big on people needing an extensive amount of qualifications to do something, because qualifications are all relative. So like one of the things, like, because Dr. Tyler, you've competed in bodybuilding as well, so you get it. A lot of people get a lot of flack where they do one show and then they become a prep coach. And people kind of condemn those people and say they've only done one show and now they want to call themselves a prep coach and they want to work with other people. And as long as you're not getting into anything that could be potentially like hazardous, like performance enhancing drugs, without an extensive background knowledge of their pharmacology and how to like implement them and stuff, as long as you're not doing anything that could be potentially dangerous, I don't see why one show wouldn't qualify you for someone to use your services that's at that level. Because no matter what level you're at, there's always going to be someone beneath you. So if I've lost 10 pounds and that's the only experience I have is cutting my calories and losing 10 pounds, there's someone, again, quote, beneath me in terms of experience level that could probably learn from my insight.
Right.
So I've never been one to be super, super highly credentialed in terms of like, if my programming or if my dietary advice or whatever is effective and applicable. But at the same time, you also don't want to see people lose money. So like if I spend a lot of money for something, you want to receive value for that financial investment. And I don't think that a lot of people are getting their financial investment or their value from where they're allocating their funds to. Like if it's a person online or whatever, you know.
It's funny you say this. So I was listening to a podcast today because I wanted to kind of gear my mind for this. And in the podcast, I actually talked exactly about this. And that got me really thinking. And to be honest with you, I completely agree with you. And I think where the tide turns too much is that, so you mentioned bodybuilding, and this is actually a conversation that came up in the podcast, is that the problem with bodybuilding and the problem with anything is, and honestly, like you could throw a dart at the fitness industry wall and you're going to land on this topic, but like people sell their experience, not actual knowledge. And this is the problem. Like the carnivore diet, the keto diet, intermittent fasting, butt exercises, whatever you want to pick. People do that stuff. They get results. They put it up on social media, and then other people see that, and then they inquire their services on how did you get that? And so then they get enough attention. They're like, oh, I should just sell this, not realizing that these people are genetically gifted, and luckily, like they did the right thing accidentally, and then people just want their services for it. You know what I mean? And so I think that's like you and I have talked about before, that's the issue where I don't fully agree. Like I've met a lot of doctors who are idiots.
Yeah.
So I've met a lot of chiropractors, I've met a lot of physical therapists. I've met a lot of people who are idiots who have extensive knowledge. So like knowledge doesn't actually give you anything specifically. But what happens is now we go to the other side of the tracks where it's like these people don't have knowledge. They just have experience, quote unquote experience, and they try to put somebody else through their experiences. And that's where you honestly put people at risk. And that's how people get hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you could actually take the opposite side of that coin too, and say that if all you're going off of is personal experience, that may be beneficial as long as your sample size of experience is big enough to accommodate a bunch of people. So like when I work with my clients for their nutrition, I very, very rarely do anything if it's not something that I've tried myself. And if I haven't tried it myself, I will make sure that contextually I preface whatever we're going to do by saying, hey, I've never tried this strategy personally before, but I think that given your situation, we should try this. Mm-hmm. So I've always tried to make myself a guinea pig for things and try different things at different times for extended periods. So that way I could definitively say, well, you're supposed to feel this way with this diet, but I didn't feel that way when I did it. This is what my experience was. Right. Versus someone who's like myopically focused on their experience because like you alluded to, Tyler, they get one thing and it works for them by accident just because they're genetically elite or they're in the right situation, age-wise, hormonal-wise, whatever, where they get this physical progress or this performance progress that they want. So it's like, okay, I did this and it worked. But because that worked for them, that's the only thing that they have really tried because they haven't had trial and error because that worked. So now they're going to tout that as this is the best. Because I'm sure, I mean, you know, from being in the fitness industry, Tyler, that a lot of it is there's a lot of hyperbole and a lot of this is the best program. Like it's all superlative based. Like this is the best diet. And you really try, the more knowledgeable you are, the more you realize you can't annotate anything with the phrase best because it's so relative from person to person.
Yeah, and that's so true. That's a great point. And honestly, like, so for myself, like you mentioned, you've tried certain things before so that you could actually touch points with people. Myself, I've tried so many diets, not because I thought it was the best, but because I wanted to experience what the diet was like. However, to like throw a little monkey wrench in everyone's little glorious anecdote that this is the best diet ever, I kept track of my calories while I did the diet. You know what diet worked best for me? None of them. They all sucked to do. They all had the same outcome. Like, for instance, one time I did a vegan diet just to do it. That was the worst month of my life. It was absolutely horrible. Like, and again, I'm not taking anything away from anyone who wants to do a vegan lifestyle if you have beliefs, whatever. But for you to come to me and say a vegan diet is like the best thing for your health and you'll feel great, I felt like garbage.
Yeah.
My inflammation was through the roof. I felt horrible. Impossible Burger is, I'd rather eat tar than throw one of those in my mouth. It was the worst. It was terrible. And again, to each its own. But if I had someone who is like did a vegan diet and they told me this is going to be the best thing ever for you, well, no, like it's not. Yeah. So you can't put me through that if you need to have more tools in your toolbox than just one. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think that a lot of it too there has to be an understanding that the diet needs to be executed with certain parameters in check, regardless of what diet it is. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the one that gets a lot of publicity is like a ketogenic diet. And Justin and I worked together and actually experimented with a ketogenic diet. I have never done a ketogenic diet before. So this is one of those instances where I said to Justin, I've never done this. I know textbook wise and literature wise how to apply it to someone, but I've never done it myself. And one of the things that I see a lot with people who do ketogenic diet is a misunderstanding of those basic foundational nutritional principles. So calories in and calories out. So they think because I'm eating a ketogenic diet, which is high fat and moderate to low protein and no carbohydrates, people assume that, because I'm eating keto, then I can eat as much as I want because I'm on a keto diet. But it's actually such a slippery slope because you're getting significantly more calories per gram, over double calories per gram of fat than you would be from a gram of carbohydrate or from a gram of protein. Right. So the total caloric intake can escalate on people real high, and they wonder why they're gaining weight on a ketogenic diet. And it's because your calories are super, super high. So just because you're a keto diet doesn't mean you can eat as much bacon and lard as you want and reap the rewards of it. So I think that when you talk about diet strategies, it all has to go back to looking at like very, very specific parameters of a diet and what constitutes a diet that's going to let you lose weight, what constitutes a diet that's going to get you to gain weight, and how to structure it appropriately from there, I think. And
I'm gonna have Buffalo Wild Wings followers with pitchforks and flames in my yard after this comment. But as much as I love wings, try being on a keto diet and just eat wings all the time and see how much weight you lose.
Yeah,
right. Probably none. Probably will gain a few, really. But Justin, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupt you.
What I was gonna say is that like with what I've seen with these diets, fad diets, is people only sell the extreme successes of them too. Mm-hmm. They don't talk about the the moderate or the middle of the road people. Like you lost 8 pounds, great. And they only talk about the ones that have lost 100 pounds on keto or carnivore, or added X amount of body mass to their physique because they did carnivore. They don't talk about the other stuff, so that's where it's hard for people that, you guys got me thinking about the diet world, right? And that's my side. That's my world is how do I help people come to find the right diet to do, because that's what I had to do. And it's hard to sell any particular diet to any particular person. That's why I lean on Charlie all the time when I ask for help, because he's, a genius. So in my opinion, because of what he did with my transformation. So I don't know. I guess it's more of a statement than a question.
Sure.
Like, how do you sift through? I guess there is a question. So how do you sift through and suggest a diet?
Yeah. So, I mean, my first question with people is always, because we do nutritional counseling, is always, what are you going to stick to forever? And that's the biggest
polarity there between the two of you.
It's always about sustainability. I saw this quote. I got to interrupt you, Tyler, before you continue, because it fits perfectly in there. I saw this quote on Instagram, and it said, if the ketogenic diet, and it was specifically to keto, but you can this can be analogous to any diet. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it said, if the ketogenic diet works every time you do it, it doesn't work.
Right.
Because if it worked, it would be sustainable, and you wouldn't have to revisit it over and over again in order to lose a discernible amount of weight. Right. And I thought that was perfect, because it's just alluding to the lack of sustainability for certain people who do certain diets. Like, I don't do a ketogenic diet, and I know that I wouldn't be able to sustain it, because it's not something that I think my body would respond well to. Nor would it be something that I would enjoy. So I think that the enjoyment part is part of sustainability. But continue. You said when you guys do your consultations for nutrition, the first place you start is asking, you said, what they can do forever.
Yeah. So sustainability is always the first one. And it really goes from there, because to be on, and even if you don't try to do that, if you give someone a diet, if you give someone a meal plan, and just wait, because very rarely will you give someone a meal plan and there won't be some sort of backlash.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't eat this. I don't do this. I hate greens. I hate things with faces. I hate things with leaves. I hate anything that has color. Like, I hate water. Like, there's so many things that pop up that people will say. And so what are you going to do? Be like, sorry, you got to shove it down your face. That's great, because you're going to lose a client at that point, so it's not even just in a diet realm. It's everything realm. It's, what do you like to eat? What's your preference? Even as far as, are you someone who has a very busy job that you have to eat out, that you guys order out a lot? Because that comes into play. There's a huge difference between a single male who lives by himself in an apartment and a mom who has 4 kids and a husband who just eats meat and potatoes every night, to try to create a meal for her that's going to be sustainable as well.
Yeah.
And so, sustainability has so many dimensions, and you have to figure out like what it is for that specific person in front of you, or else they're not going to abide by it. Or if they do, they're going to get great results, but then they're going to realize how much they hate their lives. And then your social proof is going to now turn into a massive implosion. So
I think that's where good coaching comes into play. First and foremost is understanding the individual context, not just from like a physiological and genetic and goals perspective, but also, like you said, with a lifestyle thing. Because I tell this to people all the time, that like the biggest thing for sustainability is understanding the difference between practicality and optimal. So like, I can put together the optimal diet plan for someone based on their situation and their goals, but it's not going to be necessarily practical for them to do that. Like something little, like you said, Tyler, with meal frequency. If you don't have the time to be able to eat these meals at these times, well, then we'll scale back optimal, because it's like a sliding scale. Something is, here's practicality, here's optimal. Most people's practical is going to be very far away from optimal. So you kind of got to, maybe put in place what's optimal, and then find that sweet spot where it becomes a little bit more practical for them to implement. And that's just an understanding of people's lifestyles and actually listening, versus, because some people have extensive knowledge, like you said, but they could be idiots. So I know what looks perfect on paper for Justin to eat, but I also don't take into consideration what Justin's job is like, what the stress demands are like. You don't take into account what times his sleep patterns are, or lack thereof, with having a child. All those sorts of things kind of play a role. And I think that good coaches understand that, and bad coaches good coaches look at nutrition as a lot more than nutrition, whereas bad coaches look at nutrition coaching as just the diet, and that's it.
Mhm. No, and that's a great point. A very good point, and something that made me really think about that. And I've said this before on my, with my podcast content, not to shamelessly plug there, but I've said this before a lot, is that where we in the medical field, and I still put myself in there, however, I'm kind of drifting away, but like where we in the medical field really do a disservice to people, as we like to take research and we like to take science and we like to punch people in the face with it. And then that's it. It's like, well, no, this is what it should look like. So there, or this is what research says. So there. Well, I'm sorry, but real life does not have a white coat, a microscope and money thrown at it to do research. Life, just because you're dieting, one thing I always tell my patients is just because you got hurt doesn't mean life stops. So now it's your job to figure out how are you going to implement this stuff into your life. Just because you're trying to lose weight, life doesn't stop. In fact, life sucks even more in the sense because A, you're pissed off because you're dieting and you don't want to. But B, as soon as you diet, everyone wants to go to happy hour and there's 5 birthday cakes in the conference room. So it's like there's always things thrown at you. And that's what makes me so angry with doctors or whoever, is that people will go to see them and they'll give them these perfect scenarios. And it's like, well, if you just do this, then your life will be better. Well, thanks. I'm glad that your advice as a doctor to me, as someone that you hardly know anything about, is merit, because in reality, what my life is like outside of here, how many kids I have, how far my commute is to work, how stressful my job is, the people that I deal with, the clubs that I'm a part of, the point that I'm trying to contribute to society. And oh, by the way, the fact that I'm in debt out my eyeballs, like there's not a whole lot I can do about what you just suggested to me. You know what I mean? And these are things that we really need to take into consider better. And it's like you said, someone, I won't even say good or bad, a more aware coach will take those things into consideration, where like those who don't have a good coaching IQ might, be more ignorant to those facts.
Yeah, for sure. So with that said, you said that sustainability is key. And I think that that's something that you can kind of parallel into other areas as well, where, specifically fitness, for example. I think that anything you do specifically in fitness, but in life to attain a goal, has to be sustainable. I remember, Dr. Tyler, you're probably familiar with him, Justin. I don't know if you, either of you guys know Christian Thibodeau.
Yeah, I know of him.
He's a writer for Testosterone Nation, and he was, I believe, an Olympic weightlifter for the Canadian national team, and now he's a pretty world-renowned strength coach, and he does a lot of stuff online. He has a pretty big media presence on there. And I remember Thib saying one time, he said the best, because he said the question he gets all the time as a strength and conditioning specialist and Olympic weightlifting coach and all these things, he said, is what's the best workout? And again, superlatives like best, you can't really apply to anything because there's so much individuality and a bunch of context there. But he said the best workout is the one that you enjoy doing the most.
Yep. And I was gonna say hit training while fasted, but that was just me.
That's it though. That's your best for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of our coaches has a great saying that I love it. It's definitely, I could see someone hating on it, but the golden rule is treat others the way you would want to be treated. But in reality, the golden rule should be treat others the way they want to be treated.
Yeah.
And that's something I feel like we miss out a lot on, is we're like, well, what would we do in this scenario? Well, maybe you should ask them what they want to do in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So the other thing that I wanted to bring up personally, because Dr. Tyler, you and I had the opportunity to speak in a formal type of context when I was on your podcast, and we brought this up, and I wanted kind of to add Justin to this conversation too, especially because Justin recently, 11 months ago, had his first child, So
congratulations.
child development in Dr. Tyler, you have one that's relatively fresh as well, correct?
Almost a year and a half.
Awesome.
So child development is something that's very near and dear to all of our hearts, not just because of you guys being parents of newly born or relatively newborn kids, but also because of working in the fitness industry, me working with adolescents and teaching youth classes and working with students. And the biggest thing that we've noticed, and Dr. Tyler and I talked about this, and now I'm allowing Justin to come into the conversation, is kids nowadays, and it's not just kids, but that's the specific paradigm that I'm kind of entrenched in, cannot move well. And it seems like as a society and as a whole, not even society, just as a human race, we're like de-evolving. Like our evolutionary path has reached the pinnacle and now it's on the downslope where we're starting to regress.
We've done that to ourselves, like systematically, in my opinion. You know, with the advancement of technology, as you know, with cars and how relative, like how frequently you can feed yourself.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it's unbelievable. And you know, we've talked about this off air a few times, where that's a passion of mine, is to change like the trajectory of childhood development. Not just because of my having a child, because I didn't have a child 11 months ago, but I really want to find the way. I don't know how to find the way yet. You know, I haven't figured that out, or we'd be, you know, millionaires. But like find a way to make kids not want to be fat or overweight or sluggish or slow, or, you know, there's diamonds in the rough. I mean, Charlie, you're the scholarship trainer. So there are kids that have the ability and the want to, but the majority of kids don't even care to go play outside.
Yeah.
And you know, this one, I'm sorry, Justin, I'm about ready to explode right now. So that's like, I've been bubbling here because it's like this thought's in my mind. Not to steal your thunder, but no, I totally agree with you. And honestly, and like what Charlie said was, you know, kids nowadays don't move. And people are like, why? You know, we sound like the old men on the front porch with kids scootering through their yards. Like, why don't kids run anymore? Well, what do their parents look like? You know, kids don't move nowadays. Well, how do their parents move? Because honestly, like the best part of working out at home is whenever I set down my kettlebell and I walk off to the side to take a drink of water, and my son runs over to the kettlebell with perfect form and tries to lift it up.
Yes.
You know, and it's like they see what you do. And so it's not just parents. Like I do blame parents for pretty much, I blame two people for everything. And you're going to hate me for this, but I blame parents and I blame teachers. And not in the bad sense with teachers, but like those are the two and coaches too. You could even throw coaches in there. Those are the 2/3 people that kids are around all the time who can give them those habits to where they actually, you know, they would fulfill those needs every day, but they don't.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Those are the people that make the most impact on kids' lives. And it's,
sure,
in my opinion, it's their responsibility above all to make it a priority to impact the kid's life in a positive way.
Well, one of the big things about leadership and success is, you know, it's talked about all the time. Justin and I have talked about it on our podcast as well, about how you're kind of a product or a byproduct of sorts of the people that you're most regularly around.
Yes.
And kids are even more impressionable than adults, and they're growing up and developing habits of the people that they're around the most. So like you said, Tyler, that's parents, sure. But then teachers. I mean, some kids that I'm around spend more time with me and their coaches than they do with their parents.
Yeah.
So they're going to develop habits. So that could be, you know, body language habits, that could be emotional and spiritual habits, that could be the way that you interact with people or your professionalism or lack thereof, I guess. So if you want kids to move better and stress the importance of movement, then you yourself have to be like an exemplar of that. Like one of the things that I've done with my training is not just structure my training for my goals, but structure my training for the way my athletes want to perform. So that way I can show them that I can do it too. Like I don't care how high I can jump right now because it doesn't matter to me because there's no carryover into real life. There's no functionality component for jumping high for me right now. But if I can jump real high, it's a little bit of an easier sell to my athletes. Like, hey, look, I'm 5'9" and can still dunk a basketball with two hands because this is the type of training that I do. So if you guys buy in, you can have similar progression or similar results or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I've done is kind of be a model, not necessarily of what I want to be, but be a model of what I want my athletes to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, and and as a not to go down this rabbit hole, but like as a society, I think one of the biggest problems too is we like to black or white everything, and I don't mean that in a racial way, but like we like to. It's either like, you either got to be, the most you're going to have the experience and that's it, or you got to have the credentials and that's it, or like, with school systems, with like food, with like nutrition choices. It's either like, well, we got to give them just spinach and chicken every day and that's it, or else they're not going to be healthy. Or it's, well, they're not going to listen to that, so we should just do what we've always done. And it's always like we always have to choose one or the other with people instead of like finding the gray area, because that's where things really fall apart, is that we don't find a good gray area. And so it's always, again, not meaning this way it sounds, but it's always a white versus black type of mentality with this. And that's why nothing ever gets done, because instead it's like it's a tug of war instead of us helping each other up the mountain.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the most important thing to me, honestly, is I don't care if you're right or if Charlie's right or if, the guy across the street's right. I just want to find the right answer. Mm-hmm. And even if that's part of yours, part of mine, part of everybody's opinions, we need to find the gray area and utilize people like, yourself and Charlie and all these people that care.
Well, I think that when you talk about finding the right answer, the ironic part is the fact that we are given the answer from the start, and we choose to ignore it. So today, this is like Tyler, when you said that your son comes and tries to pick up the kettlebell with perfect form because biologically and anatomically, that's what he's designed to do and how he's designed to do it. Mm-hmm. Justin, today, we were in the gym and we were squatting today, and Justin said something along the lines. He said, Charlie, I finally found someone who has better squat form than you. And I didn't know where he was going with this. And I said, he said, this girl I know or something. And I said, oh, is she an Olympic lifter? Because generally in the performance world, Olympic lifters who do clean and jerk and the snatch tend to have the best squat form from a biomechanical standpoint. And I thought, oh, is she an Olympic lifter? And you said, no, but she will be. She's only 11 months old. And, that's something that Justin and I have talked about before, is how babies, mechanically are designed to do everything so well. And then we have man-made devices like chairs, for example, that screw up and impair our long-term ability to continue to do those things. So I think that would be a good place to take a commercial break. So what we'll do is we'll go to a quick commercial break, and then Dr. Tyler, we'd like your insights on how to improve that when we come back. So let's go to a quick commercial and we'll talk more momentarily. As listeners of the Chasing Dreams podcast, we know that you demand the highest quality at all times. If you're interested in quality, look no further than Beast Mode Baking. Beast Mode Baking aims to bring the highest quality, creative, and of course delicious baked goods to your home with nationwide shipping. All orders need to be pre-ordered to ensure they're packed fresh and shipped out to you as soon as possible. Beast Mode Baking offers a flat rate of $15 for shipping due to the size and weight of the cookies and doughs. So if you're interested in Beast Mode Baking, please contact CEO Shannon Knorr. That's at SKNORR13 on Instagram, and order your delicious baked goods today, because every time you support them, you're supporting the podcast as well. And we are back from our commercial break. Okay, so during the break, Justin had to take a little bit of a hiatus, actually. Unfortunately, he had some family emergencies arise where he had to dip out. So it's actually just Dr. Tyler and I back for round two. So prior to the break, Doc, we were talking about movement issues and how we fix them. So I postulated, based on your premise, that it's very important for us to be leaders in that sense. If we're spending a lot of time around kids, I said that I needed, and I continue to try to do a better job of being an example of movement, even if it's not strictly conducive to what I'm trying to accomplish from a physique or performance perspective. Although from the performance side of things, it definitely is. So how do we fix it? Like, we know that people can't move very well. How do we spread knowledge? Because the knowledge of how to move better and how to, create a human body that's so much more functional than what we're relegated to right now. We know that the information is out there, but how do we get people to see its importance?
Boy, if I only had that answer,
if we had that answer, we wouldn't be asking the question, I guess.
I'd be a millionaire, just like Justin said. So yeah, to kind of, the kind of backtrack, how I think we get it started is that, for one, just be there. Like, you and I both know the person, and whether it was a coach or whether it was a parent, that like they were just always there.
Yeah.
They might not have had all the knowledge or understanding, but they were at least there. Because if there's no one there, then the kid has absolutely no one to take advice from. And as long as someone is there and they're enthusiastic about at least getting the ball rolling, that's honestly, in my opinion, one of the most important things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you could have a dad who's the most knowledgeable person in the world when it comes to strength conditioning, but if he's never around to show his kids how to do it, that doesn't matter.
Yes.
Yes. From that point, then, we have to respect the human body and individual differences. And I think a lot of that is like kind of the next thing. And that's something that we take for granted too much. We all know that high school football coach who was a powerlifter back in the day, who won a few gold medals, not realizing it was in the basement of a Papa John somewhere. But, he has a few gold medals. He has some experience. And so that's the person that puts together all of the programming.
Yeah.
Or it's the guy that used to be a bodybuilder, and then he puts together all the programming and just does like bodybuilding stuff, whatever. And they don't take into consideration individual differences, like you mentioned. And this is something, yes, when I look at my son do a squat or bend over, like, it is picture perfect. But what people, and we like to throw this buzz around all the time, but what people also don't realize is, as those kids get older, then variation kicks in. You have longer femurs, you have longer tibias, you have hip angles changing, you have shoulder angles changing, you have, they have bigger, longer trunks, they have smaller trunks, they have bigger feet, they have smaller feet, they have high arches, they have no arches. Like, there's all these things that kick in too. And the problem is, we like to look at kids and be like, why can't, if we just moved right, we'd be like that. No, we wouldn't. My son is perfectly symmetrical from foot to head right now. Me, on the other hand, I am like, God made Mr. Potato Head and then threw him in a junkyard and picked him up and put him, and then had him delivered. And so it's like, it's not my fault. It's just what I was given. But what we need to learn with that too is, whenever you do program, and even if you don't program, like if you're a high school football coach and you're training people and you have that kid, and a lot of times they'll show you, like, for instance, you're a good squatter, but you're a good squatter because your trunk to leg ratio is very similar. Okay. I have an athlete right now who that's the way he is. He has a long ass trunk. And so he loves to squat, but God forbid you get him to try to pick a bar off the ground and deadlift. It's horrible for him because he's so far from the bar. Yeah. Me, on the other hand, it looks like a dumpster fire if I try to squat, because my trunk is so short and my legs are so long. However, you put a bar on the ground, have me go to rip it off, it looks great. At least I'm saying that, But anyhow, but that's the thing too, is like, we don't take into consideration those individual differences. So if you are a coach or a parent, take this with a grain of salt, but the kid's going to tell you if they're going to be a good squatter or not. Like, when they go to squat down, it'll look pretty typically on its own. They might need a little bit of cueing, but that's about it. But like, it's not by chance that all NBA basketball players look like hell whenever they try to squat. They all have the same. And so I think that's the other thing too, is if a kid looks like shit, don't keep trying to square peg round hole them. Realize that might not be the right movement for them, and then switch it up.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, that's where the whole knowledge thing starts to, that's where like kicking the bucket happens, is because they don't have knowledge. They don't know what to change. It's like, well, he can't squat, so we'll just keep at it and keep, again, square peg round holing it, and then hope to God someday he can squat.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and see, I've ran into those issues with clients where, like, one girl in particular comes to mind. I've worked with her since she's been in like 7th grade, and she's a college basketball player now, and she has obnoxiously large femurs. So like her and I, she's a little bit taller than I am, maybe like an inch, and her hip bones are like nearly up to like the top of my rib cage. Like, it's insane how long her legs are. So because of that, she has so much hip flexion when she squats that it's almost like she's doing a low bar squat, but it's almost impossible for her to get to adequate depth. And when you talk about a playing situation, her coaches are always on her defensively about staying low. Like, oh, you're not low enough. You're not low enough. You're not low enough. But mechanically, she moves super, super well in the lateral sense. But getting lower is not making her move any better laterally. It's just creating awkward leverages that she can't really comfortably sit in. So we tried to problem solve around some squat stance, and realistically what we just ended up doing was saying, forget the barbell squat, we're just going to leg press. And she's had a ton of growth and a ton of like power from it, and her performance has been phenomenal. So we just kind of, like you said, don't make the round peg square hole insane by repetitive repetition, just doing it over and over again. Just get rid of it entirely if it's not working for you. The other example that I've used with people is when I'm teaching a squat to someone, I always show myself in an anatomically correct textbook form, so to speak. So what I'll do is I'll stand with hips slightly wider than shoulder width, feet slightly wider than hip width, roughly about shoulder width, feet perfectly neutral, toes facing forward, and talk about proper hip abduction as you sink into the squat and all this. And I can't do it. I'll say, watch, this is as far as I can get. If I externally rotate my feet, maybe a half inch on each foot, suddenly I just miraculously fall down into place, and it feels so much more natural for me. So then that kind of elicits the discussion of millimeters and centimeters as far as like your hip morphology and stuff can make a huge difference in how you stand, how you squat. So I try not to cue and teach how movements look. I try to cue and teach how they should feel. Mm-hmm. So once people learn this is how the squat should feel, then they're a lot better off than this is how the squat should look necessarily. So I want to take this one step back, I guess. And instead of talking about like the highly technical things with athletes, let's talk about how to fix it on a foundational level. So when we have little kids, how do we keep them from developing, or how do we keep them developing motor patterns that are necessary at like incremental stages of life? How do we make sure that they can tie their shoes and, walk backwards and climb a tree and do all the things that like kids seemingly can't do nowadays? And the tying shoes one sounds like it's like a hyperbolic metaphor. I'm being dead serious when I say this. Kids can't even bend over and tie their shoes without falling, some of them. So How do we fix that in like, think broad spectrum, like general population?
Sure.
Not kids that are receiving coaching or playing sports or anything like that.
And when you say that, like two things really come to mind. Is the first one is this, this is always like kind of cliche now, kind of not, but allow them to fail. Mm-hmm. Allow them to, for instance, like Rhett's, and that's my son for people who don't know his name, but like Rhett, if he is getting mad, if he tries to do something he can't do and he starts getting mad and he like throws it, I'm not going to like do it for him. I want him to figure it out. So he goes over, picks it back up, gets mad, throws it again, goes over, picks it up. And then what I might do is I might grab. So let's say he's trying to get a cap off a bottle. I'll grab the bottle and I'll show him what's supposed to happen, put it back on, then I give it to him. And then that's when he figures it out.
Yeah.
And so it's the one thing of like allowing them to fail, but it's also the point too of don't forget teaching moments. Don't just be the guy that's like, oh, throw him to the sharks. We'll just have him fail forever and then eventually we'll figure it out. Like, realize that you have experience they don't. Show them what they should be doing. If they're, like, if your kid's very young and they can crawl up the stairs, but they have trouble going down the stairs, well, then, like, show them how to go down, use all the senses of cueing. Show them how to go down the stairs. Tell them how to go down the stairs if they can actually understand cerebrally, like, how they should do that, and then take their limbs and show them how they should go down the stairs. Then they're getting sight, they're getting, the auditory, and then they're also getting the tactile cueing for them to learn it, and then let them fail and let them figure it out, and they will.
Well, failure in the sense of getting hurt, I think, is what allows us to adapt and move appropriately. So one of the things in the performance world that's cued a lot is like a soft landing, like how to land soft. So like when you jump, for those listeners that aren't really familiar with like a lot of terminology, when you jump off of something, what you need to do is you need to land softly. So when you land on impact on the ground, you absorb that force through what's called knee flexion and hip flexion. So you bend at the knees, bend at the hips, and kind of land like you're trying to, almost like a ninja, like you're landing very quietly. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we have to cue athletes to do is land softly. And it's a shame because that is a cue, or then that's a skill, a movement skill, I guess, that should never have to be taught, because we had that when we were younger. Because when you're playing and jumping out of trees and jumping off the porch, that's the only way you can land without breaking your tibia. Mm-hmm. Or, blowing your knee out or something. You have to absorb load through limb movement. So all kids used to land soft because we'd all jump out of trees and just keep running. So I think that as the more play you experience, the more your body problem solves based on what's hurt or what hurts. So if I'm going to hurt doing something, I'm going to not move that way. If I go to pick something up and it kind of hurts my back, I'm going to use more leg leverage, straighten my back up, and use more of my legs to pick it up. So I think that the more kids move, the more they become almost like kinesthetic problem solvers. They solve their way through movement, but you have to expose them to scenarios where they can get hurt. Like allow them to fall down, allow them to fall off the swing, allow them to develop the coordination and balance to do those sorts of things. Let them climb up the slide backwards and hopefully they fall down and then they try different grip or different step pattern the next time or whatever. Just the more experience that kids can get moving and failing at moving in their environment, I think the better they're going to be long term.
Yeah, I agree. And again, like kind of goes back to, again, like giving them, and this is the other thing too, is giving them different, giving them different cueing senses of whether it's like, because a lot of times, I mean, this is the typical scenario. So I was reading a book once and it was by a psychologist, and he was talking about whenever he would work with abusive parents. And he's like, we a lot of times just give up on abusive parents because we think they're just horrible people. And they like, we should just take them away from their kids and that's it. And granted, I'm not saying like, it's not that I'm supporting this by any sense, but what he said was he would take parents and their kids in, and what he would find is the problem is like the parent would already be tired. They would already be a little bit irritated. And then the kid, if for those of you who don't have kids out there, your kids feed off of you and how you're behaving. If you're, our son, like I can tell if one of us is upset, our son's way more upset. If we're both calm, he's way more calm. And so what happens is these kids get all upset and they get, they get irritated as well. And then you have a parent shouting at the kid who then shouts back at the parent, and then nothing's getting done.
Yeah.
And what you have to understand is you can't just sit there and shout at your kid like, do it this way, do it this way. Why are you not doing it this way? Well, obviously what you're doing is not helping them. So now it's time to go to a different way. So if you're yelling at them, it's not working. Well, obviously auditory learning is not their key. So then you get up off your ass and you show them. And if even showing them doesn't quite do it, now you grab a hand, you grab a foot, you position them, you show them how to do it then, and then let them figure it out. And this kind of leads into the second thing, not that I, just to keep the ball rolling, is something else that people don't do well is they don't like, how do we get kids to change is we need to set an example. I get it. Like I work, owning a business, I work 60 plus hours a week. Like I come home sometimes I'm exhausted. But if I come home and I sit on that couch and I don't move around with my son, that's the example I'm setting for him is daddy comes home, sits on the couch, watches TV. You hear about the old 1950s example of like dad comes home, mom has dinner ready, dad eats dinner, then goes, sits in the recliner, watches TV, mom brings him a scotch, and that's it for the night.
Yeah.
And we can't have that. If you want your kid to move, I better hope if you want your kid to move, you better be able to move just as good, if not better than your kid.
I love this quote that I saw. And I don't know if he's the one that coined it, but Matt Jansen, who's a very famous bodybuilding coach who works with the top level pros, posted a picture several months back, and it's resonated with me. And I think about it often. It's a picture of him when he competed at a show. And it's from the back. It's like a back lat spread or back relaxed. And he's got like his glutes completely in. He's shredded, just peeled. And he said, if you ask someone to go there, you have better been there yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really cool. Just, a reference to you have to be able to set the example. And I think that if someone were at home with me, they would see the same thing. Like when I come home every day at night, it's do the dishes real quick and pass out and be lazy. And any free time that I'm awarded at home, which is essentially nil, but if there were some, it would be caught just resting and literally doing nothing because there's no energy that I am able to muster up from working 3 different jobs nonstop all the time. So the context there is I see Charlie at home and he's lazy because all he does is lie around. They don't see what goes on at work and the high energy output that I have throughout the day. So it's kind of like the same thing with your son. Like if he just sees you coming home and being lazy, then inherently that's what he's going to develop. So you have to kind of make an effort to recognize when your audience is watching you and do things like appropriate like that. So like even for me, when you talk about health and wellness in kids, it even boils down to like my nutrition in school. Like I'm eating multiple times throughout the day and the kids ask what I'm eating and why I'm eating it. And they know that I drink protein shakes and they know that everything that I eat is disgusting in their words, but they start to get it. Like I have very open conversations with my 5th graders about what the foods I eat are, why I eat them, how I prepare them, like all that sort of thing, because they have like a genuine interest in it. So then they see the example and they'll say like, oh, well, coach eats this way. I want to eat this way too. I want to have a protein shake. Like I'll have parents that say, the kid will go home and ask for chicken, rice, and vegetables, which is cool because they say, oh, well, coach eats that. I want to eat that too. So just when kids look up to you, which obviously your son does, you have a very, very, very important responsibility to be a leader and an example of what you want your kid to be. But I think that sometimes people don't think about the movement portion of that. They think about behavior. They think about like the hard work and the job and how you speak to your wife and stuff like that. But they lose sense of like the physical aspect too.
Sure. Yeah. And so like one of our big values at Inner Strength is to show your scars. And like this really got my mind pumping here. So one thing that I learned last year, and it was actually at the end of this past year, is how poor my health. I don't want to say that. I don't want to say like I was on my deathbed dying, but like how poor my health actually was. And it's funny because I've heard people say this before where like, especially like they have the business, they're a parent, they kind of let their health go to crap. And but like, it's mostly in the sense of, I quit working out, I quit eating well. I just focused on being a dad and I focused on work and that was it. And I just let my health go to crap. Well, for me, I was like, that's never going to be me. I'm not going to ever do that. So I did the reverse. I literally thrived, and I use this in quotes and in a sarcastic tone. I thrived at everything. I still worked out 6 days a week. I still read every day. I still listened to audiobooks. I still did this. I still did that. I was still a dad. I came home and was a dad. I worked 70 hours a week. And you know what happened? I burnt out like crazy. And for a whole year. And you know what? All I did was just kept talking to myself that you'll make it through. Just don't be a wuss about it. Just keep pushing. And I say that not to brag because it was stupid. But the other thing that I think happens as well is we talked about the kids, what the kids to do and what we could do as an influence. But in reality, we have to look at the scenario of, okay, well, if I'm too tired to play with my kid, why am I too tired? Or if I don't have the energy to go out and throw a football or play the drums or whatever with my kid, why don't I? If I don't have the libido or the drive to want to, get together with my wife once the kids go to bed, well, why don't I? And people fail to miss that. People just get in their day to day and they're like, oh, why, I'm being a dad. I'm showing up every day and I'm going to work every day. Like I'm doing what I need to do. Well, yeah, you're hitting bare minimums. And I don't say look at it as like you're hitting bare minimums in the sense that you are being like mediocre. I don't mean it like that. You're hitting bare minimums because you haven't maintenance checked in a while. You haven't looked at what you're doing every day and what you could be doing to make your day better. For me, it's the fact is like, I don't take enough me time. I don't give myself enough quiet time. When I do, I feel guilty if I have downtime. I feel guilty if I go for an extended walk. I feel guilty if I listen to the radio on the way home instead of listening to an audiobook. And that has led me to be worse of a father than I potentially could be. And although someone might look at that and say, well, no, that's a good thing. Well, no, it's not, because I'm running out of energy for my son. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's a huge other conversation that we could kind of have an entire episode of a podcast on, just in and of itself, is that you can't make others happy until you're happy. Because I kind of went through very, very similar rationale in my own head where I'm trying to be the best that I can be for everyone else and not taking time to do the things that I need and want. And what happened was I became miserable just in my own skin because I wasn't doing the things that I wanted to do, from take bodybuilding, for example. I was so caught up in working and training athletes and teaching that I never had the opportunity to really pursue bodybuilding consistently. It was always, I'll do this show and have a productive off season for a year, and then it just goes to the wayside, where I was training, but I wasn't training the way that needed to be done. And I was eating well and healthy, but not to the point that a world-class athlete would eat.
Mm-hmm.
And, I kind of got to the point where I said, I have to, even though you feel guilty to, as you worded it, or you don't have time for yourself, you need to make time for yourself, because if you don't fix that, you're not going to fix anybody else. And like I said, that's kind of a whole nother animal in and of itself that we could uncork at a later date for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but no, yeah, and I totally agree with you. And I think, to be honest with you, to really get the ball rolling, like those are two really big things that people should focus on to get, because I think we get too sucked into the, we go out and we buy Supple Leopard, and we get too sucked into like the minutia of what we should do. And in reality, we're missing the boat on the bigger things with, it's like the 80-20 rule. We're missing out on the 20% of things that give 80% of the results.
Yeah. Yeah. We try so hard. And I don't know if that's like a social media thing, but it's difficult, but we always get focused on details without first achieving mastery of the basics. And that's definitely a big fitness analogy, a big nutrition analogy and training analogy. But I think it's with everything, that people are so far caught up in, as you worded it, the minutia and the small details, that they're not even mastering the basics. So they have no business even knowing what those details are. But for some reason, they get caught up in it, thinking it's going to be like an easy fix, when really it's not. It would be the short answer.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think too, like the basics. If people looked at like my programming, or even it's funny at our gym, because, and not that I want to be on the pedestal of being a doctor, but people at our gym all the time forget that I'm a physical therapist, and it's not because I don't know what I'm talking about. It's because I have worried more about the basics than anything else with people, because that's what accomplishes more. We have like what we call our 7 foundational movement patterns. And, if you can't, squat, hinge, step up or lunge, like laterally step up, do a push, do a pull, do a plank, If you can't do those things without good form, just those, then you have no business going on to the next thing.
Yeah.
But we always want to go on to the next thing. And that's a lot, even with the diet world, like rather than just take care of, 2 or 3 things that we could do to just make our diet a little bit better. And a lot of times, like for me, like we have a saying, subtraction by addition. In order to diet better, a lot of times it's adding things in. It's adding in more vegetables, adding in more protein, adding in more water, whatever it might be.
Yep.
And we're always worried about like, what can we take away and what can we do this? And let's try this diet. How about you just try to, do 2 simple things to change for the big change.
And there's like psychology at play there, where if you set up a nutrition plan for someone, because this is a strategy that I use as well, when you set up a nutrition plan for someone, you're like, if you immediately start restricting, saying you can't eat this, you can't drink that, their mentality towards that is a restricted one. Like, no, this is going to suck. I can't even eat this. I can't drink any of this. But you can get those same results, but what you have to do is just add things in to replace them. So like one strategy, like you said, drink more water. That's something I do with my clients, is track water intake initially, to the point where it becomes habitual and we don't have to like actually log how much water you're drinking. But as an arbitrary number, just tell them, hey, drink a gallon of water a day. And then all of a sudden they're too full from the gallon of water a day that they don't have room stomach volume wise for any pop, or they don't want to drink any alcohol because they're just tired of drinking liquid. I drank so much water, I don't even want to bother with those things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that like there's psychological benefits to doing something like that. And then there's obviously performance benefits to doing that, which is, why you do it in the first place.
Yeah. And I agree, and along with that, like, again, going back to the whole black and white thing. And I want to make this full disclaimer. I do not say these things because I feel like, I have it all figured out. I say these things because these are what I learn and what I continue to learn along my own, journey. But like the whole black and white thing, I think the reason being we get too caught up in the minutia is because we either want to be, you're either working hard or you're lazy. So everyone wants to be the hard worker, like in reality, when it comes to bodybuilding diet. Now, granted, I'm definitely like throwing grabbing a wide shovel here. It's not quite like this, but people, bodybuilding diets, you do not have to do chicken, rice, broccoli, or anything like that. Okay. You can do a lot of different ways to form your nutrition, but we all love to talk about how hard we're struggling. We love to talk about how hard our workout is, how hard our diet is, how hard our life is, how much our job sucks, how much our kids just tear us apart, how much our wife is like the worst thing ever. Like we want to talk about that because then we seem hard, then we have that, then it's like the black mentality, but then, or it's the opposite. It's like, well, I don't really try because I don't need to try, or if I don't try, I won't fit. Like I won't, then I have nothing to look back on, or if I don't try, then someday I will. So it's like, that's the white side where it's like, you're either like lazy or you're working your ass off, and God forbid, like wherever's just in the middle and doing the right things and not overdoing anything. And we're doing just the right stuff to give us just the right results.
I get it. And I feel like I am guilty of the former of those two personally. Sometimes you feel the need, and that's like a social media thing. And I'm just being truly transparent and very, very brutally self-honest with me. I do work a lot, but I also kind of feel the need to have some like validation for that hard work, because it's always nice for people to recognize effort. And I always like getting recognized for my effort, as most people do. So it's nice to put it out there on social media. Like, no one cares that I'm at the gym at 3:50 in the morning, but I post it up anyway. And there's that little bit. Now it's nuanced for me. There's multiple reasons. I like people seeing the lead by example type deal. Like, hey, I'm at the gym at 3:50. I don't care what your excuse is. So I do it for that. But it's also nice when someone comments on it and says, man, you're really dedicated. I don't know how you get up that early. That's awesome. Because that's validation for me. I feel like, oh, my hard work is paying off. People are cognizant of it. They're recognizing it and they're applauding me for it. So like, I'm the man. So I definitely can relate to one of those. Definitely the hard work, or just talking about it. But then on the other side is I've also been adamant about trying to still maintain proper contextual understanding of what it is. So like people say the grind, like for teaching, for example, like teaching is a phenomenal job. Like I know that it's stressful and there's emotionally jarring at times, but like, listen, you don't work weekends, you don't work nights, you don't work holidays, you don't work summers. It's the only job that's indoors that still gets called off for inclement weather, even though it's climate controlled. Like it's a really, really nice gig. And I spent a summer working in the oil fields, doing like roustabout work and roughneck work. And like, I love when teachers say how hard it is and how it's exhausting. I'm like, listen, you go pull a 21-hour shift in the oil field and then tell me what exhausting is. You guys don't even know. So there's always someone out there working harder and doing more and grinding more than you are. So I really try to stay away from like buzzwords like that, especially because they lack substance and they're like nothing that you and I do is a grind in the true reality. So,
and a lot of times too, nowadays, there's all this talk about like carnivore diets, or it's about, our ancestry things. But I think a lot of times too, there's a hidden insecurity because we don't have to do too much anymore. And so in our minds, it's like, we have to make it seem like we do more because we really do nothing.
Yeah.
I did physical labor from high school all through college, worked 80 hours a day, 80 hours a day, 80 plus hours a week. And I mean, it was horrible. But yeah, that's the thing. I think we just, we take that black or white, and then, but really what happens then too is like we do that and then we don't transfer it over to our children, or we don't transfer over to being a good mentor or example to others.
Yeah.
And so it's just,
you got to fix yourself before you can fix other people though. And then the big takeaway message is once you're able to be cognizant of your own shortcomings and personality traits and movement patterns, maybe like we talked about earlier, once you fix yourself, then you can be that example for other people, which is kind of why, Justin and I started this podcast. It's like you gave that disclaimer about you don't know everything and this is just your experience. Justin and I started this podcast with the understanding of like selfish endeavors. Like we wanted to bring on guests and talk openly and transparently about our situations in order to better ourselves. We weren't starting this podcast like we had information to share or anything like that. We just had good conversations, and we could bring some guests on that are a lot more successful than us and a lot more intelligent than us, and they can give us some information and we'll use it. And then we'll just let the listeners listen into our conversations, and maybe it'll help them too, which actually brings me to kind of bringing this podcast here to a close. One of the things that Justin and I have done with every guest that we've had on since the beginning of the show is we ask them a series of questions at the end, which is never prefaced to them before the episodes. They don't know what the questions are. It's kind of off the cuff questions, but it always brings everything to a centralized focus back to the theme of our podcast, which is the Chasing Dreams podcast. So how do we continue to chase our dreams and find success? So the questions that I have for you, and I'm going to read these off all at once. There's 3 of them, and then we're going to revisit each of them individually. Okay. So what does the phrase chasing dreams mean to you? Do you feel as though you've chased your dreams thus far? And how do you continue to chase your dreams and help others do the same? So digressing back, what does the phrase chasing dreams mean to you?
Chasing dreams to me means doing the most with what you have towards what you want to strive for at your current moment.
I like it. We talked in an earlier episode with Dr. Edwin Adams, which would have aired a week ago once people are hearing this. And he said that we had a lengthy discussion, and part of our discussion with him was talking about the phrase "you can be anything you want to be" is a huge misleading phrase, and kids should not be given that. And I like how you said where you want to go with basically with the tools that you have, you know, the things that you have right now. I think that's important context, is your dreams also need to be something that's achievable based on your current settings.
Yeah. And that's, you know, to go off of that, the reason being I bring that up is, so I've been talking, this has kind of been my theme this week. I talked about this in my podcast, but, again, not a shameless plug by any means, but, basically it was, you know, here's how we start off 2022 is what I want people to do is I want you to write down what your perfect scenario would be. Right. Like if you go out of bed tomorrow and everything was perfect, what would your scenario look like? And then you circle 3 main points on that scenario. And those are like going to be your action points. And then your perfect scenario, I want you to take it and I want you to burn it. And that's it. Because a lot of times the problem is like we talked about earlier, life doesn't care if you get hurt.
Yeah.
Life doesn't care if you get married. Life doesn't care if you broke your leg or if you become disabled. You know, a lot of times, like we have this goal that, and this, I was talking about this in one of the episodes, like we have this goal that we set and it's like, no matter what, we have to get that goal. Well, no, like, I mean, would I love to be further in my career and stuff like that? Sure. But like, I have a loving wife and the most beautiful son upstairs running around right now. So like, yeah, I could be here, but like what they don't tell you is that a lot of those people that are very high up in their careers are very lonely and hate it. Yeah. They have nothing to go home to, hence why they stay all day at their job. So you have to really dream all comes down to, you have to work with what you have at that moment. If you're married, it's going to look different. If you're single, it's going to look different. You know, if your parents are living with you, it looks different.
Well, I think you kind of answered the second question there with, do you feel as though you've chased your dreams thus far? Because like you said, you know, you're not as far as you would have liked to have been at this point, but that's why this is a journey. And you listed off all the wonderful things that you have going for you. Like you own your own business and you're opening up more clinics and you have a wife and a son and everything seems to be pretty picturesque on your end. So obviously you're in the process of chasing them. I mean, that's why it's called chasing dreams. It's not caught dreams because you never really catch them. But I feel like you pretty much already answered that you're well on your way with that.
Yeah, I remember. And this honestly, it all does come down to social media, but there's a guy, he's in the strength conditioning / fitness world. And he also, I'm not going to like, he has a credentialed background. We'll just put it that way. And I remember, and he's around our age. And I remember I used to listen to him and I was like, damn, like he is just doing all this stuff right now. He gets all these photo ops with all these people. Like he's traveling around the world with this guy who's also famous in the world. And like, they're doing all these things together. Like this guy, like he's got it all figured out. And then he divorces his wife. And he no longer like now, like they're divorced and he doesn't really have like anything outside of work.
Yeah.
Or it's like, you know, you find out about all these other people, all these other tycoons in the business world who you look up to and you're like, oh man, they had their shit together. And you're like, no, like for instance, Steve Jobs did great things for the world. And but like what people don't know is Steve Jobs had a horrible relationship with his family. And towards the end, when he was dying, is whenever he was actually trying to create a relationship with his kids. So again, it's not to long win this answer, but it's, you got to do with what you have right now, because you're not in the same scenario as the person beside you.
Interesting. And then branching off the last part of that question, or these questions, plural, is how do you continue to chase your dreams and help others do the same?
To be honest, we kind of alluded to this earlier, but it's taking care of myself. You know, full disclosure, like I have a mental health guy that I touch base with every few weeks. And it's really just about keeping my head on straight and not putting myself, and just realizing that, you know, you need to be your best self. I hate using that term. It sounds horrible. Some millennial girl just like got off on that one. Basically, like, you just gotta be like, just learning to, like, you have to become your best self. You have to optimize your situation so that you can be the best for others. And also understanding that, and really it comes down to two, is just not taking myself too seriously. Because I think that's a huge thing that prevents me from my dreams, is I take myself way too seriously and like think that I have to be perfect all the time. And that's really what, you know, takes me off of like my course.
I like it. Thank you for sharing that. Now, before we close up shop real quick, where can people find you at? I would like you to do some plugging of both your business, your podcast, your lifestyle, all that stuff, where people can get in touch with you and how they can connect with you.
Yeah. So on social media, you can text me. It's Dr.Tyler_Bordick. You can look me up there on Instagram, and then on Facebook, obviously, by my name. The podcast that I do every week is called the Healthy, Fit, and Pain-Free Podcast. We are on Spotify. We are on Anchor, Apple Podcast, YouTube, all those things. So you can check me out there. I go over a lot of content that really has to do with getting out of pain, getting stronger, losing weight, optimizing your health, and just really try to provide implementable, no BS, easy advice to just help you to get back doing the things you love with people you love. And then if you want to learn more about the gym, Ryan and I's gym, it's innerstrengthpgh.com.
Awesome. All right, Dr. Tyler, thank you for your time. We'll have to do this again.
Sure.
And we're just going to have to like kind of reciprocate the favors back and forth. I went on your podcast, you come on mine, go back on yours, you come back on ours. So on behalf of Justin and our listeners as well, so sincerely thank you for coming on today. All right, so with that, we have come to the end of another episode of the Chasing Dreams podcast with Charlie and Justin. This has been episode 113. We appreciate your listenership, and we look forward to seeing you guys again next week.
Unbreakable, unstoppable, I'm pushed to the edge and take it all. I'm born to be untamable.